The result of the Norwich North by-election is due to be announced later today. The vote was triggered by the resignation of the Labour MP Ian Gibson following criticism of his expense claims. It's just been announced that the turnout was 45%. Well, our political correspondent Carole Walker is in Norwich for us. Just how significant is this result today?
Well, I think this is unique, as Gordon Brown put it, in a rather unusual by-election. You have a lot of anger locally about the way Ian Gibson was treated. Now, he was barred by the party from standing at the next general election because of the revelations about his expenses, but then decided to stand down to trigger this by-election. And a lot of people locally feel that he was treated rather unfairly in comparison with other senior figures within the Labour Party. So there's that factor. You've obviously got more general disillusion with the Labour government. The Labour candidate, Chris Ostrowski, has been missing from the campaign for the last vital 3 days because he's in quarantine with swine flu. So there are some particular local factors at work here, which I'm sure Labour will be very quick to point out to us. But the Conservatives have campaigned very, very hard here indeed. The entire shadow cabinet have been up here. David Cameron's been here 6 times during the course of the campaign. And I think that David Cameron really needs to win here, and to win by a significant and a comfortable margin if he's going to gain the momentum that he needs.
We've seen them all before the count, and we can see them counting feverishly behind you. Labour saying, well, we wouldn't be surprised if we lose this to a great degree, which all plays into our hands if they do indeed lose it. But if it is a bad result for Labour, what does it mean for Gordon Brown?
Well, I think it's unlikely that a bad result here is going to trigger any immediate bout of leadership speculation, partly because they've done so much to downplay expectations ahead of this, and partly because of those local and particular factors that I talked about there. But it does feed into this sense that he's not a winner. And I think when we come to the party conference season in the autumn, Labour have got another very difficult by-election in Glasgow North East, which we haven't got the date for yet. That's expected to be later on in the autumn. And it's certainly going to add to Gordon Brown's woes. And let's not forget that although there are particular local circumstances, many of them were brought about by the Labour Party itself. It was partly because of the technique that was brought in, this star chamber that looked over Labour MPs' expenses, that brought about Ian Gibson's decision to resign. So I think if Labour do lose here, and that is certainly what I'm hearing from sources who are pretty much resigned to defeat, it certainly will be another serious blow for Gordon Brown.
It is the first test after the whole expenses fiasco. Is there a feeling that it's not the main parties who are going to benefit from that?
I think that's absolutely right. I think that what we're seeing is that the fallout from the expenses row has led to a lot of general disaffection with politics. Talking to people in the run-up to this vote, a lot of people said they simply weren't going to bother to vote, or they were not going to vote for any of the main parties. Now, what's interesting here is that you've got a very strong Green presence. You've also got the Liberal Democrats, and there is in Craig Murray, an independent candidate who's got some very strong local connections and could perhaps poll up to a couple of thousand votes. So in a sense, I think Labour is going to be helped by this fact that the votes that don't go to them will be splintered between a number of different minor parties, and that might be enough for them to hold on to second place.
Carole Walker in Norwich. We'll be back to you later. For now, thank you. We're not expecting a result from the Norwich North by-election until around lunchtime, but we're just hearing the Press Association quoting their Labour sources, suggesting that their party, Labour, is not only set to lose the by-election, but could be pushed, it says, into a humiliating third place.
Yes, with counting underway, the Conservatives are on course to overturn the 5,459 majority won in 2005 by Ian Gibson, who quit the Commons after being controversially banned from standing again for Labour over his use of taxpayer-funded expenses.
So it looks as though the fight is between Labour and the Lib Dems for second place, but of course we will know at around lunchtime. Full coverage here on BBC News.
The result of the Norwich North by-election is due to be announced later, with Labour sources saying the party could be pushed into a humiliating third place. We already know that the official turnout was 45%. The vote was triggered by the resignation of the Labour MP Ian Gibson following criticism of his expenses claims. Well, our political correspondent, Carole Walker, is in Norwich for us. And so Labour think that they could be in third place.
Well, Labour sources, even overnight, were effectively conceding defeat. They've admitted that they've really struggled to get their vote out. You have a combination of a lot of local anger at the way Ian Gibson was treated. The local candidate, Chris Ostrowski, isn't even here because he's in quarantine with swine flu. And you feed into that a real sense of disillusion with the Labour government. Certainly the Liberal Democrats are talking up their prospects. They're saying it could be pretty close between them and Labour for second place. Now, if Labour were beaten into third place, I think that would be a really serious blow, given that Labour have already started, if you like, making their excuses for the loss here. I should perhaps explain to you what's going on here, because what has happened is that they have verified the ballot papers and they're having a little tea break before they get on with the rest of the counting. They're taking a very civilised approach to this. Usually we get these declarations around about 2 o'clock in the morning. We're still expecting that result, hopefully, sometime before noon.
And David Cameron said they're making us work for every vote. He's been up to visit the area 5 times. Serious pressure on the Tories. I mean, they really feel they've got to win.
Yes, they've thrown everything at this campaign. David Cameron, in fact, has been here 6 times and has even been here on private visits away from the media. He was out delivering leaflets at dawn on polling day yesterday, along with George Osborne, William Hague. They have really thrown everything at this, trying to get their candidate, Chloe Smith. If she wins, she'll be the youngest MP at Westminster elected. I think David Cameron knew that there were always going to be huge expectations that the Tories would take this. He has to fulfil those expectations. Tory sources have been trying to play down expectations, saying that they expect the result to be tight because the turnout is lower than they might have hoped. And there does seem to be a sense that although the Labour vote has been depressed, it hasn't necessarily translated into a huge swing in favour of the Conservatives. Instead, former Labour voters have gone with either the Liberal Democrats or the Greens or the UK Independence Party or one of the independent candidates, or simply stayed at home. And I think that will be a worry for David Cameron, because he will be really looking for a resounding victory here.
OK, Carole Walker, thanks very much indeed.
A very good morning. The result of the Norwich North by-election is due to be announced shortly, with Labour sources saying the party could be pushed into a humiliating third place.
We already know that the official turnout was 45%. The vote was triggered by the resignation of the Labour MP Ian Gibson following criticism of his expenses claims.
Let's go straight to our political correspondent Carole Walker, who's there for us. And Carole, as we were reading there in the introduction, the focus seeming to shift not about whether Labour will lose, but whether Labour will be pushed into third.
Yes, that's right. I think it looks as though Labour probably will hold on to second place, but there's no doubt that the Labour vote has slumped since the last general election. That's partly because of local anger at the way Ian Gibson was treated. He was barred from standing as a general election candidate and then resigned to force this by-election. There is disillusion with the Labour government. There is also the fact that Chris Ostrowski, the Labour candidate, has been out of the running for the last 3 days because he's in quarantine with swine flu and he's not even here at the count. But it looks as though that Labour vote has gone several different ways. Some voters have simply stayed at home, some has gone to the Liberal Democrats, some to the Greens. Not perhaps the huge switch to the Conservatives that you might have expected, even though it looks as though the Conservatives are on course for victory. And I'm joined now by the Tories campaign manager, Theresa May. Theresa, first of all, are you confident, happy that you've got this victory?
Well, I never predict election results. As can be seen, everybody is actually counting the ballot papers behind me. We know we had a very positive response on the doorstep, and I was very pleased with that. But we do know that this was an election that took place against the background of the MP's expenses issue, and that hasn't had an impact on people's attitude to voting.
The indication that I've been getting, and I'm sure you must have picked up this same thing, is that although the Labour vote will definitely have gone down quite significantly, those former Labour voters haven't necessarily switched in droves to the Conservatives.
Well, we did see some Labour voters coming to us, but some Labour voters did stay at home, and I'm sure some went to other parties as well, because there was an element against the background of the MP's expenses issue of a sort of plague on all the main parties' heads. So we have seen a little bit of that. But we fought a very positive campaign here. We had first-class candidate Chloe Smith. If she is announced as the MP in about an hour's time, she will be the youngest member of Parliament, and she's been a long-standing campaigner here in the local area. But I think what we've seen here is a real feeling among people. They want to change.
David Cameron has launched a very high-profile campaign here. He's been here 6 times. He was out, I'm told, before dawn yesterday, dropping some more leaflets through the letterboxes. How important is a by-election like this to the Conservative Party and to David Cameron himself?
Well, any party coming into a by-election like this wants to be able to win it, wants to go out and win it, and we've had, yes, David has been up here quite a few times, as you say, and actually showing a lead and showing the party together, coming here and working together, the voluntary party.
But are you looking for a significant increase in the Tory share of the vote?
Well, just look at the history of this seat, Carole. Over the last 59 years, when this seat has been in existence, it's only had a Conservative MP for 14 of those years. So for the vast majority...
It was in Tory hands up to 97, though.
For the vast majority of the time, it has been a Labour seat. So I think if we do have the result that Chloe Smith has won, this will be a significant victory for us in terms of taking the seat. I hope that's the case, because I think Chloe is going to be an excellent Member of Parliament, and as a young woman, I think she shows a different approach to politics and a fresh face of politics, and I think that's what voters want.
Okay, Theresa May, thank you very much indeed. Theresa May has been masterminding the campaign here. As you can see, the counting is still going on. We're hoping to have a result probably just before 12 o'clock, unless, of course, there are any recounts.
OK, Carole, thanks very much for now.
Let's return to the by-election in Norwich North and the implications for the government. The result, of course, due in the next hour or so. Well, Vernon Bogdanor is Professor of Government at Oxford University, and he joins us in the studio now. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Labour have given up this as a lost cause and are expecting to lose it. If they do, as they expect, to lose it, what are the implications for the government and for Gordon Brown in particular?
It depends how badly Labour lose the election by. If they lose it by a small percentage, they can say, well, this is just swings and roundabouts, we've got a good chance of winning it back. But if, as some are speculating, Labour comes third in the by-election behind either the Greens or the Liberal Democrats, then that would be very serious. Nevertheless, I don't think it will arouse more troubles for Gordon Brown. I think the Labour Party just had enough of that. They'll go away for the summer and reflect.
If Carole Walker, our political correspondent in Norwich, was suggesting that they might actually have secured second place, which I suppose would be viewed as something of a moral victory, actually, given how bad things have gone for them recently.
Yes, a good second place won't be too bad. They will lick their wounds and hope to recover over the summer months.
Might that, sort of conversely, if the Lib Dems only come third, might that then perhaps shine the spotlight on Nick Clegg a little bit more?
Yes, indeed. In the past, we were used to the fact that Liberal Democrats did well in by-elections. They were a protest party, if you like. People who didn't like the government, weren't convinced by the opposition. They don't seem to be doing too well in by-elections now, and that indeed will lead to some soul-searching on the part of the Liberal Democrats. Why can't they capitalise on the expenses crisis, an unpopular government, an opposition which hasn't really made its pitch felt? Why can't the Liberal Democrats do a bit more? So indeed, that will cause a lot of reflection amongst people in that party.
The other fascinating aspect of this, of course, is how the minor parties pick up votes in terms of a protest vote, if you will, against the expenses scandal. What are you expecting to see from that point of view? I'm
expecting to see a fairly strong performance by the Greens. As you say, the protest parties should do well because of the expenses scandal, which affects all the major Westminster parties. And the Greens have a strong record in Norwich. They did well in the last general election, and they're the opposition on the City Council. They're the second largest party, so one would expect them to do well, and indeed they have quite high expectations in this seat, so it'll be interesting to see how well they've actually done.
It will. Well, I dare say we'll have plenty to talk to you about a bit later. For the time being,
thank you.
Vernon Bogdanor, thank you very much. Now, we're expecting the result of the Norwich North by-election shortly, so let's take a look now at the main contenders. For Labour, it's Chris Ostrowski. He's 28 years old and at the moment has suspected swine flu.
Well, he was working for John Lewis in London before winning the nomination. For the Conservatives, it's 27-year-old Chloe Smith.
She's been running a high-profile campaign. For the Liberal Democrats, it's April Pond. She is 47 years of age and she's a businesswoman and has owned various cafes, restaurants and shops.
For the Green Party, Rupert Reed, a 43-year-old local councillor who works as a lecturer in philosophy. The Greens are the main opposition party on that council.
Well, Vernon Bogdanor is Professor of Government at Oxford University, and he joins us now, and indeed will be here for quite some time to talk about the result when it comes in the next half hour or so, we're expecting. Professor, why is this by-election so important?
This is the first by-election we've had since the expenses scandal, and it's worth remembering this is a very unusual scandal because most scandals affect just the government party, but this is a scandal that affects all the parties in Parliament. So it's interesting to speculate how Norwich North will react to that. Will people abstain? Will there be a very low turnout? Will they vote for what they might see as protest parties, like the Greens, for example? It's really a very fascinating by-election, I think.
And looking ahead to a general election sometime in the next year, it's going to be fascinating to see what kind of analysis can be drawn from the various percentage rises and falls for the main parties.
Absolutely. This is a seat the Conservatives need to win if they're to form a government. If they can't win this seat at this stage, then their chances of winning the general election aren't very good. But it looks, as you suggested earlier, as if they might have taken the seat, and that would be good news for David Cameron, but it'll be interesting to see by how much and by how near Labour comes to the Conservative vote.
There was a lot of speculation that Labour might be pushed into third in this by-election. Our correspondent in Norwich suggests they might indeed have clinched second, which I suppose would be viewed quite positively in government circles.
If Labour comes a good second, people will say it could have been much worse. They'll heave a sigh of relief. If Labour's pushed into third place, or if they're a long way behind the Conservatives, there'll be a renewed period of soul-searching over the summer. It won't be a very happy summer for Gordon Brown.
Well, is there much appetite, do you suspect, for another examination of his leadership?
Probably not. I think Labour Party MPs have had enough of that. They had a crisis at the time of the Euro election. They don't want to go through that again. I think they'll go on holiday, take a bit of a rest and perhaps reflect on what all this means.
OK, well, we'll talk to you again as the result comes out.
Now it is creeping up to 12 o'clock. Don't forget, within the next few minutes, we are expecting that by-election result from Norwich North, because the counting has been going on for some while, and already Labour sources writing off their chances of winning. They are expecting to lose the seat to the Tories. Ian Gibson, of course, was forced to actually... well, he was told he wasn't going to be allowed to stand in the next general election, so he promptly resigned, and that's why we've had this by-election. But some focus on whether Labour will actually be forced into third place. Carole Walker, who's there, is suggesting that perhaps they will hang on and actually come second. But as you can see, those are the pictures from some of the counting.
Well, our political correspondent Carole Walker is at the count and waiting to talk to us. Carole, any indication of when that result is going to be announced?
Well, it now looks as though we've got to wait a little bit longer, perhaps up to another half an hour before we get the declaration here on the stage behind me. They're just in the final throes of counting, but I think we've got a little bit longer to go as yet. It looks as though the Conservatives are on course for a victory. The question really is by how great a margin, whether they can increase significantly on their 33% share of the vote, which they had at the last general election. At one stage, the Liberal Democrats were talking up their prospects of beating Labour and taking second place. It now looks unlikely that that is going to happen. It looks as though Labour will have held on to second place. There's no doubt that the Labour vote has taken a big cut, but those former Labour voters appear to have splintered between the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, UKIP, and some of the independent candidates here. But we're still awaiting that result. But it does look as though Chloe Smith, the young Conservative candidate, is going to become the youngest MP at Westminster.
Right, Carole Walker in Norwich, thank you very much. We'll be back to you, of course, as soon as we get an announcement of the result of that by-election in... Hello to you. We're expecting the result of the Norwich North by-election shortly, with Labour expected to lose the seat to the Conservatives.
Well, we already know that the official turnout was 45%. The vote was triggered by the resignation of the Labour MP Ian Gibson following the criticism of his expenses claims. Let's go straight to our political correspondent Carole Walker, who's there waiting for that result to come in. And Carole, fair to say that already it's pretty much been written off by the Labour Party?
To 38%.
Yes, that's right. I think that happened overnight after the polls closed. Labour resigned themselves to the fact that they were going to lose this seat. They are already, of course, pointing to some of the particular local factors. There's been a lot of anger and resentment amongst local people at the treatment of Ian Gibson, whose resignation triggered this by-election. He was barred from standing by Labour's Star Chamber because of the revelations over his expenses, but some people locally feel that he was treated perhaps more harshly than others in the party. The Conservatives do appear to be on course to victory. Conservatives here seem pretty confident of that. I think the focus now is going to be on the margin of victory. Can David Cameron show that he's really increased the Conservatives' share of vote from the 33% or so that they got at the last general election? And just to let you know that we're now expecting that result perhaps between 12:15 and 12:30. That's the latest estimate.
How much pressure will there be on Gordon Brown? Because we've already seen a glimpse of the government's strategy on this. I mean, you were there in Downing Street for his news conference when he was talking about it a couple of days ago, and he was describing it as a unique election. But how much pressure will there be on him if they do indeed lose?
Well, I think Gordon Brown was preparing the ground for this defeat. It will be a further blow to his authority, yet another by-election lost by Gordon Brown. Now, I think Labour are already preparing their excuses, pointing to some of those particular local factors. There's also, of course, the fact that the Labour candidate, Chris Ostrowski, is not even here. He's been out of the campaign for the last 3 days because he's in quarantine with swine flu. But there's no doubt that this will further damage Gordon Brown's reputation, further increase those who say that he's simply not a winner. Now, I don't think there's going to be any immediate renewed bout of leadership speculation, but I think it will feed into the general mood as we head towards the autumn conference season. And I think that is the time when there is a possibility of more trouble for Gordon Brown.
And of course, we wait to see the breakdown of the votes for the various parties. But again, all the indications are that parties like the Greens are going to do rather well.
Yes, what appears to have happened is that there's absolutely no doubt that there's been a slump in the Labour vote, but those former Labour voters have not necessarily gone straight over to the Conservatives. Some have simply stayed at home. Others have gone to the Greens, who've done quite well locally. They're quite optimistic. The Liberal Democrats and also UKIP, who are hoping for a pretty strong showing. We've even got an independent candidate, Craig Murray, a former British ambassador to Uzbekistan. He may well also pick up enough votes to further splinter the vote. In a sense, I think that is what will have helped Labour to hold on to second place and thus make it perhaps a less than humiliating defeat.
OK, Carole, we'll be back to you a little later. Thanks very much for now. Thank you.
Well, Vernon Bogdanor is Professor of Government at Oxford University, and he joins us now to talk about the possible outcome of what might happen in Norwich North. Professor Bogdanor, Carole Walker was just hinting at that in terms of what might happen in terms of damage to Gordon Brown, it'll just feed in to the kind of malaise about his leadership. Do you share that assessment of what might be the outcome of this result?
That's absolutely right. I don't think the Labour Party has any more appetite at the moment for leadership speculation, but clearly the need will be for Gordon Brown to relaunch the Labour campaign at the Labour Party's conference in September. The electorate are giving him a bit of a kicking, and we have to see how he will react to that. But I don't expect to see any immediate conflict over the leadership.
In a sense, I suppose he's described this by-election as unique. In a sense, he can write it off as the first post-expenses scandal by-election. He will find it more difficult to do with the Glasgow North East by-election, which is looming at some point in the autumn as well, isn't it?
The Glasgow North East election will probably be held in November, and this is a seat that was normally safe Labour. Now, it's been held in recent years by the Speaker, and the main parties don't oppose the Speaker, so it's a difficult seat to judge. But the likelihood is that the main opponent of Labour in that by-election will be the SNP, and they're tending to do well in inner cities where Labour has previously been strong. They won another seat in Glasgow last year, normally a safe Labour seat, from the Labour Party, so the Labour Party could be in trouble there from another direction, from the SNP. On the other hand, they held on to one seat in Scotland, an inner city seat last year, against the SNP, so there's still a great deal to play for.
And in terms of the share of the vote for all the parties, the way it pans out post-expenses scandal, that's going to be fascinating in this particular by-election, isn't it?
Some people have clearly expressed their annoyance by not voting at all. Turnout, as Carole said, is about 45%. It was 62% in the general election, and this is just one way in which people are expressing their dissatisfaction. OK,
Professor Bogdanor, thank you very much. I just want to show you the scene in Norwich where we are waiting for, fairly soon, we hope now, there is Theresa May representing the Conservative Party for the outcome of that by-election, that Norwich North by-election that was triggered by the resignation of Dr. Ian Gibson. The Labour Party, the government have written off this result. They already expect to lose and lose significantly. The key is going to be now, do they come second or third? Do the Lib Dems beat them into second spot? All of those questions and more will be answered in a few moments when we actually get the result. It is coming fairly shortly.
Now that's a rosette.
That is, and a hat as well.
Now it is edging up to 12:30. Let's check on the weather. Let's return straight away to Norwich, where we're expecting within the next few minutes the results of the Norwich North by-election, with Labour expected to lose that seat to the Conservatives. We already know that the official turnout was 45%. The vote was triggered by the resignation of the Labour MP Ian Gibson following criticism of his expenses claims. Let's go to our political correspondent Carole Walker, who's there for us. And Carole, we were seeing some pictures only a few moments ago, and the Conservatives looking pretty happy.
Yes, I think the Conservatives are certainly confident of victory. I think the question now is going to be how great the margin of victory is. Whether they've managed to show a substantial increase on the 33% which they got at the last general election. I think that because victory had been so widely predicted for the Tories, it's made it perhaps slightly more difficult for them. They've been trying to play down expectations. Certainly it looks as though they're not going to get quite up towards the 40%, which would have showed a real momentum for the Conservatives. Labour have been resigned to defeat essentially ever since the polls closed last night. They've acknowledged that they really did struggle to get their vote out. A lot of former Labour voters simply stayed at home or went to some of the other smaller parties. There has been a lot of anger locally at the way Ian Gibson was treated. They think that he was rather unfairly singled out by the party over his expenses revelations. But it looks as though there's been a very close fight between the Greens and the Liberal Democrats for third place, and I think the fact that there's been a strong Green showing has, in a sense, helped Labour to hang on to that second place.
And Carole, if it goes the way that you are predicting, I mean, how much pressure on Gordon Brown? Because it's yet another by-election he will have lost, and you add to all of those other by-elections, the European elections, the local elections, and it obviously comes back to a little of what Lord Malloch Brown was saying earlier in the week about the general election prospects.
Yes, Lord Malloch Brown was saying that the prospects for the next general election were incredibly bleak, and I think this will do nothing to alter that view. Gordon Brown, of course, lost very badly in Crewe and Nantwich. He lost in Glasgow. He held on in Glenrothes, importantly, and he faces another important test in Glasgow North East in a by-election that's due to be held later on in the autumn. It will be a blow to Gordon Brown. This is a seat which has been in Labour's hands for 12 years. They're defending a majority of more than 5,000. But I think Labour have been preparing their excuses in advance, if you like, pointing to those particular local factors, the amount of sympathy that there was for Ian Gibson, the fact that their own candidate, Chris Ostrowski, has been struck down with swine flu, is in quarantine, not even here today. He's going to be represented by his wife. So I think they will be very quick to point to those local factors, but it is a further blow. I don't think we're going to see another immediate bout of leadership speculation, but it will feed into the mood of the party, and I think if there's no sign of an upturn come the autumn party conference season, then that could be very difficult indeed for Gordon Brown.
OK, Carole, we'll be back to you within the next few minutes. Thanks very much once again.
Well, let's get more on Norwich North with Vernon Bogdanor, who's a Professor of Government at Oxford University. Very good afternoon to you. Do you think that one of the excuses, possibly, if Labour do, as they expect, lose this by-election, they might point to, or straws they might cling on to, is that John Major lost 8 by-elections and still won a general election?
Absolutely right. Between 1987 and 1992, the Conservatives lost 8 by-elections. Now, in 1992, a bit unexpectedly, John Major won them all back and won the general election. So we should be careful about reading too much into the result of one particular by-election. And it's worth remembering that in the period before 1997, it was quite common for governments to lose by-elections. In a sense, the period since 1997 has been abnormal, because for a lot of the time, the Labour Party, the Labour government, was a long way ahead in the polls, so they held all their by-election seats. In fact, Crewe last year was the first seat which they lost to the Conservatives for a period of about 20 years. So we're moving back, in a sense, into a normal period when governments simply do lose by-elections.
What would need to happen for history to repeat itself here, for Labour to lose all these by-elections but win the general election?
The Labour Party would have to relaunch itself. It would have to show that it had dealt better with the recession than any of its competitors could do. It would have to put the expenses scandal right, to restore confidence in Parliament. All these things would need to happen. Gordon Brown would need to construct a coherent narrative about how Labour could manage a fourth term, and I think probably the most important thing is the recession. If the economy seems to be going right, Gordon Brown is still in with a chance.
If, as you suggest, Labour were to relaunch itself, that would inevitably raise questions once again about the leadership of Gordon Brown. Do you feel, regardless of how Labour perform in this by-election, that there is still an appetite to examine his leadership?
I don't believe there's any appetite in the Labour Party to look at all this again. They looked at it a few weeks ago in the European elections, and they drew back from the abyss. They don't want the fight, the squabble of another leadership election, and of course that would probably mean a very rapid general election before the party was ready for it.
OK, Professor Bogdanor, thank you very much. More from you when we get the result. That result, incidentally, is fairly imminent, we're told, down in Norwich North. So as soon as we have an outcome from that particular by-election, we will, of course, head straight across to Norwich, because the result of the Norwich North by-election is absolutely imminent. Our political correspondent, Carole Walker, is there. Carole, a result due any minute now, we're told.
Yes, the official result coming through very shortly, but I can tell you that the Conservatives have won with a majority of more than 7,000, and that is a really convincing victory, which I think they will be absolutely delighted with. Another interesting point that UKIP have beaten the Greens into fifth place. I think we can see the candidates up there on the podium now. They're awaiting the official result. Chloe Smith, who will become the youngest Conservative MP at Westminster. We have got Colin Bland, the acting returning officer, is there, about to make the formal declaration. And Chloe Smith has been looking very, very pleased, and certainly all the team around her delighted. Interesting, you see just on the right of the screen there, that is Cathy Ostrowski. That is the wife of the Labour candidate. He's not able to be here because he's still in quarantine with swine flu, and I think that simply piled on the agony for Labour. It was always going to be a difficult seat for Labour, but this will be a serious blow for Gordon Brown. We're expecting the result now. We've got a total of 12 candidates.
We are about to get the official
declaration. Colin Robert Bland, being the acting returning officer for the Norwich North constituency, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Peter Baggs, Independent, 23. Thomas Adam Burridge, Libertarian Party, 36. Anne Fryatt, Notter, 59. Bill Holden, Independent, 166. Howling Lord, the official Monster Raving Loony Party, 144. Hey! Ho! Craig John Murray put an honest man into Parliament, 953. Chris Ostrowski, the Labour Party candidate, 6,243. April Hillary Pond, Liberal Democrats, 4,803. Rupert Reid, the Green Party, 3,350. Chloe Rebecca Smith, the Conservative Party candidate, 13,591. Glenn Stewart Tingle, the UK Independence Party, 4,068. Robert Malcolm Brian West, British National Party, 941. And that the said Chloe Rebecca Smith has been duly elected to serve as member of the Norwich North constituency.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin, of course, by sending my best wishes for a speedy recovery, actually, to Chris Ostrovsky, the Labour candidate, and, well, thanks to his wife for standing on the platform with us. And then I'd like to thank my friends, my family, my campaign team, and the hundreds of people who have campaigned for me in the last few weeks. I'd like in particular also to thank the police, the returning officer and his staff who have done an excellent job for us here today at the count. But most of all, I would of course like to thank the people of Norwich North for putting their trust in me and giving me the honour of representing them in the House of Commons. I'd also like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Ian Gibson. In Ian Gibson, the people of Norwich North had an MP who was a strong, independent and local voice. As a Conservative, I may not agree with Dr. Gibson's views on everything, but I am determined to represent the people of Norwich North with the same honesty and conviction. And that is the approach I have taken throughout this by-election campaign. Whether it was my pledge to be transparent on MPs' expenses, or my contract in which I set out exactly what I would like to do for the community locally, I've been absolutely clear. If, come the general election, you feel I haven't kept my promises, you should vote me out. But this by-election has been a victory for honest politics. The people of Norwich North have rejected the old politics of personal attacks, of bickering, of smears and scare stories. They have voted for change. And in doing so, they have sent a message to Gordon Brown very loud and very clear.
Okay, so that is the message there from Chloe Smith, the new Conservative MP for Norwich North. She won with a convincing majority of more than 7,000. That is much more than many in the Conservative camp had hoped for. This is a serious blow for Labour. I think the one consolation is that they've managed to hold on to second place, and I think there will be disappointment on the part of the Greens that they didn't do as well as they'd expected.
All right, Carole Walker, thank you very much. Carole Walker, our political correspondent down in Norwich. The Norwich North by-election will have lots more reaction and analysis of that to come. But before that, we must find out what the weather's going to do this weekend.
The Conservatives win the Norwich North by-election with a majority of more than 7,000. The contest was caused by the resignation of the sitting Labour MP Ian Gibson.
They have voted for change. And in doing so, they have sent a message to Gordon Brown very loud and very clear.
The Liverpool captain Steven Gerrard has been found not guilty of a fray after a fight in a nightclub. The British economy shrinks again, and by more than analysts had predicted. British holidaymakers are among hundreds of people forced to flee as forest fires sweep through parts of southern Spain. Finders aren't always keepers. The couple who cashed in someone else's winning lottery ticket are ordered to repay half the money. And all that glitters. The Queen displays some of the many gifts she's received in 60 years of touring the Commonwealth.
And coming up in the sport a little bit later on this hour, find out how the youngest ever Formula One driver got on in the first practice session for the Hungarian Grand Prix.
very good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC's news at 1 o'clock. In the last few minutes, Gordon Brown has suffered another blow at the hands of voters as the Conservatives overturned Labour's majority of nearly 5,500 to snatch Norwich North in the by-election. Chloe Smith, who at 27 becomes the youngest MP in the Commons, won by 7,348 votes. The Labour MP, Ian Gibson, had resigned after being told by the party's ruling body that he wouldn't be allowed to stand again. He had a majority of nearly 5,500, as we say. Well, our political correspondent, Carole Walker, is in Norwich. And Carole, the Conservatives will be very happy with this result.
So all the people who didn't vote, I wish they know.
Yes, they certainly will, Jane. You join me as those acceptance speeches are still going on the stage behind me. But the Conservatives had always hoped to win this seat back from Labour, but they had been doubtful as to how big the margin could be. We now know that Chloe Smith has won with a majority of more than 7,000. I'm told that the swing from Labour to the Conservatives is more than 16%. And if you look back at the result of the last general election, Labour have lost more than 10,000 votes. Now, that is a serious blow for Gordon Brown. Labour undoubtedly will be pointing some of the unique or local circumstances here. We know that there has been a lot of anger about the way Ian Gibson was treated. He, of course, was barred from standing because of revelations about his expenses, but then decided to resign and force this by-election. Many people locally feel that he was treated rather more harshly than many others within the Labour Party. We also have the fact that the Labour candidate, Chris Ostrowski, is not even here today. His wife made an acceptance speech on his behalf. He is still in quarantine with swine flu. But I think that this is a serious blow for the Labour Party. It is another loss for Gordon Brown. Although there may not be any immediate reopening of leadership speculation, it certainly could spell more trouble as we head towards the autumn.
The trust of voters. And that's one of the reasons why...
Still hear me with all that still going on. I mean, much more fascinating contest than so many by-elections, it's fair to say, simply because of the timing, all in light of the MP's expenses and even the campaign itself. The number of visits, for example, that we saw from really senior party members on the part of the Conservatives.
It was, of course, one of the qualities...
Yes, there's absolutely no doubt, Jane, that this by-election was very much overshadowed by the whole expenses scandal. The turnout was lower than it was at the general election. You might expect that in any case. I think there has been also a splintering away from the main parties. Interesting here to see that the Greens didn't do as well as they expected and were actually beaten into fifth place by UKIP, who got more than 4,000 votes. I think in a sense Labour was saved from an even worse result by the fact that you had the Lib Dems, the Greens and UKIP all vying for those the votes of disaffected voters. And I think that helped them to hold on to second place. But yes, the Conservatives certainly threw everything at this campaign. David Cameron was here 6 times. He was out at dawn on polling day, putting some leaflets through letter boxes. He had the entire shadow cabinet here. But I think they will look on this result as a justification for all that effort. And I think that they will hope very much that that will give David Cameron some important momentum to show that they can actually take seats straight from Labour, that the David Cameron bandwagon has not run out of steam.
All right, Carole, thank you very much for now. Carole Walker there in Norwich, and that result only coming through in the last few minutes, and we will have a little more on that story later in. Now, let's just, as promised, return to Norwich. The results that came through in the by-election there, Norwich North, just came through in the last half an hour. Our political correspondent, Carole Walker, is there, and a very, very solid victory for the Conservatives. Carole, all that attention they devoted to the constituency has paid off, it seems.
Yes, that's right. Chloe Smith won with a convincing majority of more than 7,000, and the Conservatives are absolutely delighted about this. They're pointing out that the swing from Labour to the Conservatives was almost 17%. Now, that is getting up close to the margin which they achieved in the Crewe and Nantwich by-election, larger than many people had expected. A slump in the Labour vote. They've lost 10,000 votes since the last general election. Chloe Smith was going to be the youngest MP in the House. She's just over there doing a round of media interviews. This is what she said in her acceptance speech.
This by-election has been a victory for honest politics. The people of Norwich North have rejected the old politics of personal attacks, of bickering, of smears and scare stories. They have voted for change. And in doing so, they have sent a message to Gordon Brown very loud and very clear.
Well, all that hard work with David Cameron leading a very high-profile campaign here certainly paid off for the Conservatives. It is a serious blow for Labour. They're already pointing out the unique circumstances, the anger over the way Ian Gibson was forced out and so on. But there is absolutely no doubt that another loss like this is another serious blow to Gordon Brown and could spell more trouble for him come the autumn.
Carole, thank you. Carole Walker with the latest there.
Back to that by-election result, because the Conservatives have won the Norwich North by-election with a majority of more than 7,000. The poll was triggered by the resignation of the Labour MP Ian Gibson following criticism of his expenses claims.
Well, let's take a closer look at the results. The Conservative candidate Chloe Smith got 13,591 votes, while Labour's Chris Ostrowski secured 6,243. The Liberal Democrat candidate April Pond received 4,803 votes, and the Green Party's Rupert Reid got 3,350.
Well, the Tories received just under 40% of the vote. That's a swing of 16.5% over Labour.
Chloe Smith, who at 27 becomes the youngest MP in Westminster, says the vote sends a signal to Downing Street.
Most of all, I would of course like to thank the people of Norwich North for putting their trust in me and giving me the honour of representing them in the House of Commons. I'd also like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Ian Gibson. In Ian Gibson, the people of Norwich North had an MP who was a strong, independent and local voice. As a Conservative, I may not agree with Dr. Gibson's views on everything, but I am determined to represent the people of Norwich North with the same honesty and conviction. And that is the approach I have taken throughout this by-election campaign. Whether it was my pledge to be transparent on MPs' expenses, or my contract, in which I set out exactly what I would like to do for the community locally, I've been absolutely clear. If, come the general election, you feel I haven't kept my promises, you should vote me out. But this by-election has been a victory for honest politics. The people of Norwich North have rejected the old politics of personal attacks, of bickering, of smears and scare stories. They have voted for change, and in doing so they have sent a message to Gordon Brown very loud and very clear.
That's the new Conservative MP for Norwich North. Let's go there and speak to Carole Walker, our political correspondent. And Carole, just how bad is this for Labour?
Well, it's a pretty bad result, and I think it is only really the fact that those votes that didn't go to the Conservatives were split between UKIP, the Greens and the Lib Dems that enabled Labour to hang on to second place. This was a serious blow for Labour. They're already pointing out the unique circumstances here, as Gordon Brown was before the poll even took place. There has been a lot of anger locally at the way that Ian Gibson was treated. People think that he was unfairly punished and treated rather more harshly than other people in the Labour Party over the revelations over his expenses. There is, of course, always a difficulty for the incumbent government, the Labour Party, very unpopular at the moment. And then you have this fact that Chris Ostrowski, their candidate, has got swine flu and wasn't even able to be here at the count today. But the victory for the Conservatives was a convincing one. They had a bigger majority than expected. And in fact, I'm delighted to be able to say that we've got Chloe Smith with us now. Congratulations on that. Why do you think that you managed to pull off this victory?
Well, I think this victory was actually one for honest politics. I've run a very clean campaign and I've been very open and clear about what I'd like to do as the next MP, how I plan to acquit myself, how I plan to handle expenses, and people have rewarded that. People have stood up and voted for honesty, and I'm really pleased and proud to be the next MP here.
You think it helped that you didn't have too much of a political past, so that you were, if you like, not tainted by the rows over expenses?
In many ways, yes. I'm a fresh start for Norwich North here, and I'm really looking forward to putting some energy and some vigour into being a new type of politics as well.
You undoubtedly benefited, though, from the local situation here. A lot of people were very angry at the way Ian Gibson was treated, and that really played in your favour.
In many ways it did, but the fact is now that what we've got is a new MP. This by-election was about finding the next MP, and the very next thing I'm going to go and do is start working as hard as I possibly can as the next MP. I congratulate Ian, in fact, on his time here as the MP. He was in many ways a strong local champion, and I've always said we need another one of those.
By-elections are not, of course, general elections. There were unique factors at play here. Is there really any wider significance to the result that we've seen here?
Yes, there is. This was a vote against Labour and for the Conservatives. I'm really pleased now to be part of David Cameron's parliamentary party, and I hope we will go ahead to a general election as quickly as possible so that everyone can have a chance to vote for change just like we have here in Norwich.
Are you really going to be able to hold on to this seat come the general election?
I'm going to focus on being a very good MP straight off, and I hope people will reward that again.
OK, Chloe Smith, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Just worth having a look at some of the other parts of this result, because the Greens, who'd expected to do very well, were in fact beaten by UKIP, who put up an unexpectedly strong showing there, and Lib Dems only just held on to third place. But this result here is undoubtedly a significant victory for David Cameron. It will give him greater momentum, and it is a very, very serious blow indeed for the Labour Party. Yet another by-election lost on Gordon Brown's watch.
OK, Carole, thanks very much.
Well, let's get more analysis now on that by-election result with Vernon Bogdanor. He's Professor of Government at Oxford University. Very good afternoon to you. How do you interpret this result? How damaging is it for Gordon Brown and the government?
It's a terrible result for Labour. Labour had a majority of nearly 7,000 in the last election. The Conservatives now have a majority of 7,000. Labour got under 20% of the vote in a seat which it won last time, and it could, as Carole Walker said, have been much worse, because I think some of those who dislike the government showed their resentment by staying at home. Had they voted for protest parties, Labour would have done even worse. And on this result, it's roughly similar to the Crewe by-election last year, which Labour lost equally badly. On this result, David Cameron is heading for a comfortable Tory victory. Now, of course, one has to be careful here. By-elections are not the general election. There's still a chance for the Labour Party to recover, but it shows they've made no progress since last year, and I think a number of Labour MPs will be feeling very nervous this weekend that this time next year they may be seeking other employment.
How do you interpret and analyse this result? Is it a vote about expenses? Is it a vote against Gordon Brown? Is it a vote against the treatment that the local MP, Dr Ian Gibson, received? How would you analyse it?
I suspect the treatment of Ian Gibson played a large part in this. Expenses will have played a large part, I believe, in encouraging people to vote for what you might call the protest parties, UKIP or the Greens, though they don't see themselves as that, but I think people may have voted for them on those grounds. So there were a large number of factors. It's fair to say that, as Gordon Brown said, this is a unique constituency. It was always going to be difficult for Labour to hold, with the expenses problems and with the problems relating to Ian Gibson. And then, of course, we must remember the recession, which is always there. So it could have been even worse for Labour than it is, and there'll be all sorts of excuses. But nevertheless, Labour will have to get its act together. It's got perhaps 10 months at the most to do that.
OK. More from you later. Professor Bogdanor, thank you very much.